Well, good afternoon, Scott Baker. Looking forward to this one because you teased us with yesterday's field note in a way that uh, made us all sit around with bated breath for 24 hours.
Okay. Yeah. I hope you went back and watched the recorded version several times just to get the anticipation up. And you framed it nicely. Looking forward to, because the field note today is about optimism and can you practice optimism? And we'll fully unpack this. But let's kind of set this up as a drill in your own mind. If you were to think of a leader that you admire, somebody that you've probably had all kinds of leaders, and everybody watching or listening has, and you think of somebody, someday I wish I were more and more like that person, right? So you have that person in mind. Now, how many of you would describe that person as dour, as taciturn, as grim, as pessimistic?
I bet our listening audience, it's probably maybe 2% people would say
right.
that they're pessimistic, right?
Yeah.
98%.
There's a couple of short sellers out there that are like,
right.
Okay. I like the contrarians, and fine, fair enough. But you know that you could have two leaders probably equally capable, like probably fairly good judgment. They've got the right, sort of financial skills, decent people skills in some way, but they could produce on the same challenge, the same program, very different outcomes with their teams.
Very. And I don't even know that means that Michael Burry, who is a famous short seller, is necessarily pessimistic. Like I could see him. I've not met him. I've only seen him in public settings where he's speaking, but I could see people saying, no, he's actually a very optimistic person, even though most of his predictions are dour.
Yeah. Yes. And I would say I'm being unfair to short sellers and all of that. They actually feel like they're doing something that's very helpful in the markets, right? And that what they're doing is actually going to lead to a great outcome from them. So, I mean, we're just at a meta level. So, but obviously the difference between leaders is how they explain to themselves and to their teams what's happening. So at any given moment, we're all kind of like, what's going on? How are we today? Where are things? What's the reality where things are? Now, if you have somebody that is wildly optimistic, rosy glasses, they could be totally disconnected from reality. And you'd be like, this person is smoking something. And so you could say, but do I really want to follow the leader who's pretty sure that we're doomed? And so there's got to be a way to sort through this. And the way that this field note sets this up is that it's not that the optimism is manufactured, but it can be practiced. It can be learned. And one of the things that we point back to in the research, one of the more pivotal books in this territory was the 1990 book by Martin Seligman, Learned Optimism. That's 36 years ago, right? So I read that book when it came out. I've spent a lot of time with it. And I think there are some things that we can use that kind of overlay in this field note that we can take away to say, even thinking about that book for the last 36 years, I probably don't spend enough time kind of saying, well, how am I doing on this? Like, what are the criteria? And there's some easy things to remember that I think we can lean into. But we probably all were captivated when we were younger, by a particular speaker or a particular coach or somebody that kind of really inspired us. And it was certainly true for me, and I'm guessing it was true for you. And so the question is, well, what do we need now? Like, what's the kind of thinking we need now to take us to that next level? And I think we can find it here.
I think so too. Now, yesterday's field note was specifically about, why it is that some leaders seem to handle stress better than other people do. And you would think that the practice around that would be like, okay, well, if people are stressed by having too many open loops in their life, then the practice is open more loops, right? And so it is a little odd that we get to the end of yesterday's field note, which is what we're talking about today. Like, no, you should actually figure out how to practice optimism instead of getting better at opening more loops in your life, right? Because handling multiple open loops can actually oftentimes be handled by just the way that you as a leader are approaching that life. We referenced in yesterday's field note the idea of falling in love, right? And that being a metaphor for the way that we kind of approach things. So practicing the language that's associated with how you love this thing that you're involved with I think it actually might actually have some appeal to like the way that your everyday relationships work as well, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Like if your wife is complaining that you're not romantic like you used to be back in your dating relationship, I think the main thing that she's talking about is language, right? So this kind
Probably
of
so.
language,
Right.
as we're directing it to the way that we interact with our teams in the hallway, in the organization, is something that can be practiced in a lot of different ways.
Oh, for sure. Well, okay. So let's go to the early admonition or exhortation. That's a whole much more optimistic word in the field note that the optimistic leaders make a conscious choice. They're going to view setbacks as temporary. They're going to see opportunity in challenges. They like to navigate through problems. They believe that uncertainty is just kind of normal. And they're always going to talk and kind of, even if they're giving a realistic analysis of the challenges, they're going to say, and here's where we go. Here's either where we mitigate the risk. Here's where we seek the opportunity. Here's where we can slide by our competitors, whatever that is. So to the original setup, which I think is drawn or at least inferred in this field note, Seligman talked about the idea that there are people who have an optimistic explanatory style, just as a general way, and there's others that have a pessimistic explanatory style. And so when you think of that, what he found is that tends to circle around three kinds of criteria. One is the degree of personalization, right? Is the problem in me, right? Is it also pervasive? It's going to just be, it affect everything in the organization. It's going to affect everything in my life. And how persistent or permanent is it? Is this just a problem we're having now, but it's probably not going to be a problem 5 years from now? And so if I tend to see these things and I talk about them as this is so terrible, or this is such a setback for me, or this is a setback for us, and it's very personal to me in the organization. And it's also pervasive. It's like, this is going to affect everything. This is going to affect how we do, this division of that marketing department and this thing. It's going to be so terrible for everybody. And it's going to take us 3 years to dig out of this. Well, gosh, yeah, now you're in a bad spot. But those with optimistic explanatory styles tend to not see things as so personal, right, in many regards. They kind of depersonalize the problem. They certainly don't see it as pervasive and affecting everything. They can go home at the end of the day and really enjoy, watching a show on television, and they're not really consumed by the problem that was happening during the day. And they see it as less permanent. Now, that's just a start, but does that make sense? How does that feel to you?
It does. The way that it doesn't make sense is that oftentimes we're used to absorbing marketing messages that always start with defining what the problem is. And it's a standard methodology for, like, just think of like the as seen on TV kinds of products. They always start with people having struggle with daily activities, right? And it's usually in black and white, and they're usually highly exasperated people. But that's how that story, that narrative arc always takes place for people, is that when we're telling this story, we start with the problem. Is that inherently negative?
Well, no, not necessarily. And I've given the example that I spent a 90-day period, maybe 3 or 4 months, where I was working with a team at a major financial, firm, a very well-known one, very celebrity head of that organization. And I was with a team of maybe 15 people that were in their sort of client services. And these are people that have MBAs and are highly paid, and they're all very critical and they're hired because they can see problems in everything. And I asked them the question I asked everybody at the beginning, which is, that leader you have in your mind, negative? And I went around the table, and only one person out of them had kind of like the negative leader in mind. And I said, so when are you guys planning to become like that? Because you're not. You're all very dour. You're very good at explaining how disaster is upon us, but you're not very good at saying, here's the reality of the situation we're facing, here's how we're going to deal with it. And man, there's some real opportunity here. Find that thread, that way that's going to get you out of the darkness, and you can get there. Right. But if you kind of just paint the dark picture, you're not going anywhere, and you're certainly not going to go to the C-suite.
And so this advice around optimism is not a recommendation to not mention or be real with what the problem is.
Correct. Yeah.
So we are stating it, but we are quickly transitioning into like the way that we're dealing with it. And that needs to be an optimistic tone.
Oh, for sure. Well, Seligman even makes the argument in Learned Optimism that and again, I only read this book once, 36 years ago, right? But I remember kind of outlining it in my mind and probably on paper at the time. And he talked about this idea that the research generally shows that people that have optimistic explanatory styles tend to be healthier, wealthier, wiser, and all of this sort of categories. And he's like, wouldn't that be great? The only place where they kind of like come up short to the people with pessimistic explanatory styles, the pessimists are slightly more realistic. Now, wouldn't you love to say the optimists are actually more realistic? Pessimists do tend to be somewhat more realistic. So here's the way that Seligman and his research observed all of this, which is if there's a possibility that the course of action could be catastrophic, personally, health, financially, the organization could crash, you might get arrested, right? Whatever that scenario could be, a little bit of a pessimistic check is probably okay, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to have two pilots in the cockpit and it's February and there's a lot of freezing rain going on and the co-pilot's like, I think we should probably de-ice again. We've been out here just a couple of minutes more than the normal pattern. Let's see if we can get back in line for de-icing, which is going to take us another 40 minutes before we can take off. You do not want the pilot then to go like, what's all this negative talk?
Right.
What is it? I have believed in my mind. I can see the beautiful takeoff. I know that we can achieve this. I have envisioned it. I'm leaning into it. I'm feeling the universe in this takeoff. You do not want a delusionally optimistic pilot ignoring the request to go back and de-ice. Right. There's a balance here. And we even talked about this the other day about a kind of a grounded optimism, right? Let's get some kind of a pattern of action that's grounded in reality. And then let's see what we can create from that with an optimistic explanatory style, because that's where the behavioral part comes in. And that's what the field note's about. Get busy with the language and the way that you build the narrative and the story for yourself and for others around the challenges. And then things sort of ignite.
And so it's expressions like, we can have a tremendous influence on what happens. Mm-hmm. This didn't work, but we learned something useful for next time. Mm-hmm. We know exactly where to adjust now. We can make great decisions quickly. Like these kinds of things, you can tell they're coming from a situation where we could talk about it in a very negative turn and then leave mm-hmm. the room with the negative. I'm just going to let you sit with this negativity and hope that, like, unless you say, this is great because we have learned so much from mm-hmm. this, right? And you're talking about the future. And that's really what it is. All of these framings are about the future, right? So, and we're not just talking or dwelling on what just happened in the negative circumstances. We're not even talking about the right now. We are saying, as a result of everything that we've learned, we're optimistic about the future.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of the leader's opportunity here in building that narrative is not to like lurch from, here's the problem we're in, and we gotta just jump the entire chasm to get to the good stuff. You have to build the pathway so that people can see the rocks just under the water surface. We're going to step here, then we're going to step here. If we do this and do this, then I think we're going to get here. Right. And I like our odds. I like our chances if we do that. And that's a good leader because, that's why it's not just a personality thing. It doesn't mean that you have to be the kind of just, hey, everybody, like that's not what it's about. Now, we do know that leaders who have passion and demonstrate some enthusiasm for the things that they're talking about tend to be able to get people on board a little more easily. So you might have to dial that up, and you might actually enjoy it if you're doing it yourself, right? But you have to be practical in the steps and the ways that you go about it. And I think that's terrific.
Right. So you could say it, man, this is a big issue. This problem's going to be mm-hmm. with us. Everyone needs to be prepared with the idea that probably we're going to be dealing with the ramifications of this for the next mm-hmm. 18 months. Mm-hmm. Or you can say, we are a team that can figure this out. It might take a while, but we're going to figure this out. Now, part of me looks at like those two framings and it's like, it's just a mindset issue that you're trying to deal with. Where's the real behavior? But the behavior is in the talking, right? Mm-hmm. The words that you choose are the behavior, and choosing to frame them in such a way that is forward facing is the key here, right? That's where the optimism really, it becomes sticky.
Well, the last word of the field note, possibilitarians, that
I love that
optimistic
word.
leaders are creating possibility.
Right. I love the fact that we're making that word up in the context of what it is, right? How can you say that possibilitarians is not a real word? Wait,
Yeah,
like the whole
feels
nature
real.
of the word, the whole nature of the
Yeah,
word is like inventive. So it's fantastic. I don't
love it.
know if in your editing you looked up possibilitarians anywhere else. If you felt
I
like,
didn't. I didn't. It might be out there, but in any way, shape, or form, I want to be working with a leader like that. I want to be working with people who
right,
are looking for the possibilities,
right,
and I think when we do and we get busy practicing it, it begins to get contagious, and I think that's part of the opportunity here.
right,
And by the way, you could even say, without like making a putting anything at risk, right? If there could be catastrophe, that you could say, here's what's going to happen. I think we can do this. I like our chances. Here's the possibilities. And and if we don't make it, right? Well, what's going to happen if it's not catastrophic? If we've plotted this out right, we'd be like, we will have learned this. We will have gotten stronger about this. We will have built new things into our supply chain. We'll have had new ways that we organize and train new people coming onto our team. There's all kinds of things you can say that we're hoping to get to this. But even if we don't get to this and a competitor slides in or whatever, look how much better off we'll be because we'll have this, and this. There's always an optimistic scenario and benefit to doing very hard things.
right. Fantastic. And looking forward to tomorrow's.